A terrible secret had been locked away in an old barn for 15 years, silencing the truth about Clara Bennett's disappearance. Mr. Harris, burdened by fear and shame, chose to hide her fate rather than face the consequences, betraying the trust of an entire town. But when Rusty, the stray with an unshakable instinct, led Jake to the hidden crate, everything changed. Just wait until you hear how this mystery unfolded and why justice finally found its way back to Cedar Grove. On the edge of Cedar Grove, where the fields ended and the forest began, stood a barn that looked older than anyone could remember. Its wooden planks were weathered silver, its roof sagging in places, and the air around it smelled faintly of hay, earth, and something older, something forgotten. The barn belonged to Mr. Harris, a reclusive farmer who rarely spoke to anyone. People in the small town whispered about him, saying he kept to himself for reasons no one could understand. Rusty, a stray dog with a coat of mottled brown and white, moved like a shadow at the edge of that barn. He wasn't just hungry, though hunger drove him, but curious. Weeks of wandering had taught him to read the signs of places, the scent of something hidden, the quiet that masked secrets, the way air shifted around certain corners. That afternoon, under the brittle light of late autumn, Rusty padded toward the barn's far side. His paws made soft crunching sounds in the frost-covered ground. Inside, the barn smelled of dust, old hay, and oil from forgotten machinery. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the boards, cutting thin stripes of gold across the floor. Rusty's ears perked up. He stopped. Something deeper in the barn seemed to call to him. Not hunger, but instinct. Moving carefully, he padded between stacks of weathered crates and old sacks until his nose found it. Something unusual, hidden beneath a pile of hay in a shadowed corner. There, half buried, was a crate unlike the others. It was old, splintered, and bound with thick iron that had rusted through decades of neglect. The wood was dark with age, and the lock securing it looked heavy and unnatural, almost deliberately made to keep it shut. Rusty sniffed at it and gave a low growl, then pawed at the side. The sound of splintering wood made him stop and look toward the barn's entrance. Jake Carter, a young handyman in his early 20s, appeared then. He had been working for Mr. Harris for a few weeks, fixing fences and tending to broken equipment. Jake had a lean build, with a dusty jacket and calloused hands, the kind of man who could work quietly without asking for thanks. But his face held curiosity now, and maybe something else, caution. Jake frowned at Rusty's insistence. "Don't touch that thing," he said, his voice low. "Mr. Harris says it's nothing but junk." Rusty barked once, sharply, and pawed again, this time harder. The noise echoed softly in the barn, as if disturbing something older. Jake stepped closer, shining his flashlight briefly toward the crate. The beam caught the lock. It wasn't like any lock he had seen. It was crafted with care, intricate, and strangely out of place for such a worn-down barn. Jake's frown deepened. "Why hide a piece of junk like this?" he muttered under his breath. Rusty tilted his head, letting out another soft growl. There was something in the dog's behavior that unsettled Jake. Rusty wasn't just playing. He was certain there was something important inside that crate, something worth protecting. By nightfall, Jake found himself unable to forget it. While Mr. Harris sat by the fire in his creaky cabin, speaking to no one but himself, Jake slipped quietly away. The moon hung low over Cedar Grove, pale and silent, as Jake approached the barn again. His boots crunched softly on frost-hardened ground. The air smelled colder, sharper. Inside the barn, shadows seemed to stretch longer in the darkness. Rusty was already there, sitting quietly beside the crate, as though he had been waiting for Jake. The dog's eyes glinted in the beam of Jake's flashlight. Jake knelt beside the crate, his fingers brushing away layers of dust and hay. The lock resisted at first, but Jake could see clearly now. This was no ordinary lock. It was custom-made, fashioned to keep whatever was inside completely sealed. His breath caught. Why would Mr. Harris go to such trouble? And why keep it here, hidden away? Jake stared at Rusty, who gave a quiet whine, his gaze fixed on the crate as if urging Jake to find the truth. Something about the moment felt heavy. The barn was no longer just a barn. It was the beginning of a mystery that would change everything. Morning came to Cedar Grove slow and pale. Mist curled low across the fields, and the air carried the quiet scent of frost and wood smoke. Rusty was already awake, circling near the barn before the sun had fully risen. Jake, still unsettled by the crate from the night before, found himself drawn back to the barn without thinking. Something inside told him he couldn't leave it alone. As he approached, Rusty trotted ahead, his paws stirring frost in soft crunches. Jake followed, the sound of his boots muffled in the cold air. The barn door creaked open under Jake's push, and he froze. Light slanted in through the cracks in the walls, and there, in the corner by the crate, stood Mr. Harris. The farmer's face was pale, more lined than Jake remembered, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a layer of hay over the crate. Rusty stopped a few feet away and gave a low, insistent growl. Mr. Harris stiffened as though sensing danger. "This isn't for you to see," the old man said sharply, his voice breaking slightly. His eyes avoided Jake's, fixed on the crate as if it were something alive. Jake stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mr. Harris, I need to know what's going on here." Rusty barked once, then again, as if adding his own insistence. The air felt heavier in the barn. Mr. Harris drew a slow breath, the creak of old floorboards beneath him sounding unusually loud. He finally spoke. "Years ago, something happened in this barn, something no one was supposed to know." His voice cracked under the weight of the words. "A girl disappeared 15 years ago, Clara Bennett. Nobody ever found her. This crate, it's connected." Jake's heart skipped. His breath seemed to catch in his chest. The world felt colder somehow, as if the air had been emptied of warmth. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Mr. Harris shook his head, stepping back. "It's better you don't open it. You'll only regret it." Jake's resolve hardened. He looked down at Rusty, who stared at him with steady eyes, tail still but tense. The dog's silent insistence felt like a summons. Jake crouched beside the crate, his fingers brushing away hay and dust. He spotted the lock again. Thick, custom-made, stubborn. A mixture of fear and determination filled him. He glanced once at Mr. Harris, whose jaw was tight, then found a crowbar leaning against the wall. He gripped it, his knuckles whitening, and pressed it against the lock. The first pry creaked sharply. Rusty barked again, louder this time, pacing at Jake's side. The lock resisted, groaning under the pressure. Jake braced himself, pushing harder until the metal gave way with a final, sharp sound. The lid of the crate creaked slowly upward. Dust drifted out in a thin cloud, catching the morning light. Inside was not tools, not treasure, not even the kind of junk you might expect in an old barn. Instead, neatly stacked and tied with string, were bundles of letters, a faded diary bound in cracked leather, and photographs, dozens of them, yellowed with age, their edges curled as if holding on to memories too long forgotten. Jake lifted the diary carefully, his fingertips brushing over the worn leather. A photograph slipped out, showing a young woman with warm eyes and a hesitant smile, Clara Bennett. Jake's stomach tightened. He opened the first letter. The handwriting was delicate, almost trembling, and the words told a story, not of loss, but of fear. The letters described Clara's life before she vanished. But the last letter made Jake's breath catch. It spoke of being locked away, of being trapped, alive. Rusty stood beside him, his head low, ears pulled back. Jake glanced toward Mr. Harris, who stood frozen, staring at the crate like it had swallowed something alive years ago. Silence filled the barn, heavy and full of questions. Jake's chest tightened. This was no ordinary mystery. The crate had been a tomb of secrets, a truth buried for 15 years. And now it was out. The world outside the barn seemed quieter somehow, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The barn felt different now. The air was heavier, as though the walls themselves carried the weight of a buried truth. Jake stepped back from the crate, the diary and photographs clutched in his hands. Rusty sat beside him quietly, his tail still, his eyes fixed on Mr. Harris. That silence was louder than words. Jake's chest tightened, his thoughts raced. 15 years! 15 years of a family grieving without answers. 15 years of a secret locked away under hay and iron. Anger rose inside him, sharp and unrelenting. He looked at Mr. Harris, whose face had gone pale. The older man stood motionless, shoulders hunched. His breathing was uneven, as if the moment had finally broken something inside him.
"This was your choice,"
Jake said quietly, but his voice carried something hard.
"You hid her. You buried her.
And no one knew." Mr. Harris swallowed, shaking his head. His voice cracked when he spoke.
It wasn't supposed to happen like that."
"I found her there, hurt. She was scared. I thought if I kept her safe here, away from them, it would protect her. I thought no one would understand. I thought it was better to hide it." His hand trembled as he touched the crate. "I was wrong. I didn't know what else to do." Jake stared at him, his mind grappling with the weight of those words. Clara Bennett, a name that had been whispered but never explained in Cedar Grove, had been alive here, in this barn. And the town had never known. Mr. Harris's silence had cost her everything, her life, her voice, her family's peace. Rusty gave a low growl, almost like a wordless plea. Jake placed the photographs on the crate, staring down at them. Images of Clara smiling in sunlight, letters stained with time, the worn leather of her diary. They were proof of a story stolen. Jake felt something inside him shift. Anger gave way to compassion. Clara had been silenced, but her memory deserved more than this quiet betrayal. She deserved to be heard. He stood straighter, determination setting in. He would not let this truth remain buried any longer. The next morning, Jake went to Clara's remaining family. He found her younger sister, Emily Bennett, living quietly at the edge of town. Emily's face went pale when Jake showed her the photographs and the diary. Her hands shook as she took them, her lips trembling. Tears filled her eyes. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Jake told her everything. How Rusty had led him to the barn, how the crate had been locked away for years, how Mr. Harris had admitted the truth. Emily sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded, her grief turning to something harder: resolve. News spread through Cedar Grove faster than anyone expected. Whispers turned into conversations. People who had avoided Mr. Harris now approached him with questions. People who had walked past the barn without a thought now lingered there. The story of Clara Bennett was no longer a quiet shadow. It had become something alive again. For some, the revelation was hard to accept. There were those who defended Mr. Harris, saying he had tried to protect Clara. But for most, the barn was no longer just a relic of a farm. It was a symbol, not of shame, but of truth, a place where silence had been broken. Jake returned to the barn one evening, diary in hand, Rusty at his side. The air was cool, the sky above turning deep indigo. He set the diary gently against the crate and looked at Rusty. "We did it, boy," he said softly. "We brought her story back." Rusty barked once, softly, as if in agreement. Jake knew anger had been the spark, but compassion had carried him here. And now the truth was free. The barn no longer felt like a place of secrets. It had become a place of justice. The weeks that followed were quiet, but full of change. Cedar Grove, once a town content to leave mysteries untouched, had been stirred by a truth it could no longer ignore. The locked crate in the barn, once a silent shadow, had become a story everyone now knew. Clara Bennett's name echoed in conversations, at kitchen tables, in the small diner by the crossroads. Her story was no longer buried. Mr. Harris had been taken in for questioning. He did not resist. He knew the moment the crate was opened that silence could no longer protect him, or her memory. There was no denying what had happened. The town listened quietly as the truth unfolded, some with anger, others with sorrow. But most knew something important had been restored: clarity. Jake stood at the edge of the barnyard the morning of the memorial. The air was crisp with autumn, carrying a faint scent of hay and earth. Rusty sat beside him, his ears alert, tail swaying softly. The barn loomed in the distance, its wooden frame bathed in pale morning light. What had once been a place of mystery and burden now seemed to hum with a quiet resolution. The memorial was simple but heartfelt. The townspeople gathered beside the barn, speaking softly of Clara. Flowers were laid at the edge of the field, her name carved into a wooden plaque that would hang there forever. Emily Bennett stood close to the plaque, clutching the diary and photographs that Jake had brought her. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but there was a quiet dignity in her posture. Jake watched her. He thought about all the questions that had gone unanswered for 15 years, and the way one crate, locked for so long, had changed so much. Rusty nudged his hand with his nose, bringing him back from his thoughts. "You did good, boy," Jake said softly. His voice carried more than gratitude. It carried understanding. Rusty wagged his tail, as if he understood the weight of those words. For Jake, the truth had been a kind of unlocking. It was not just the crate that had been sealed away, but the truth itself. For too long it had been hidden under fear and silence. Now it was free. The ceremony ended quietly. People lingered, some speaking softly to one another, others standing alone, looking toward the barn. There was no shouting, no anger, no bitterness, only a kind of shared relief. The barn stood still. Its walls had held years of secrets, but now it seemed almost lighter, as if the air inside had been cleansed. The hay rustled softly in the breeze. Somewhere above, a crow took flight. Jake stayed for a while longer. Rusty lay at his feet, watching the barn. Jake placed a hand on Rusty's head. "You found it, Rusty." "You found her story. You found the truth." The dog tilted his head, giving a quiet bark in reply. The afternoon sun lowered itself toward the horizon, spilling golden light across Cedar Grove. The wind carried the sound of quiet voices, of remembrance. For the first time in years, Clara Bennett's story was no longer a shadow. It was a memory held openly, a truth shared. And somewhere in that moment, Jake understood something profound. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes, justice was the simple act of telling the truth. As the crowd dispersed, the barn stood in quiet stillness, the locked crate gone, its contents carried away, its secret revealed. Rusty and Jake walked away together, side by side. In the air above the barn there was a gentle peace. It was a peace born of truth. And for the first time in 15 years, Cedar Grove felt it too.